UNCTAD urges the Trump administration to exclude the poorest economies from the U.S. tariff policy. Canada's annual inflation slows to 2.3% in March. And the EU is to announce a strategy for phasing out Russian oil and gas imports in May. You're watching Q News and this is the Economic Bulletin. We'll start off with the United States as a report by the Department's Bureau of Labor Statistics has shown that U.S. import prices unexpectedly dipped 0.1% in March after a downwardly revised 0.2% gain in February. The Fed's benchmark overnight interest rate is currently in the 4.25% to 4.5% range. Imported fuel prices declined 2.3% in March after increasing 1.6% in February. Food prices edged up 0.1% after being unchanged in the prior month. The trade-weighted dollar is down by about 2.6% so far this year, with most of the depreciation in March and the first few weeks of April as the White House doubled down on tariffs. Ireland's Central Statistics Office has shown that Irish exports of pharmaceutical and medical products to the United States surged by more than 450% year-on-year in February. This is the second monthly hike that suggested U.S. drug makers may be stockpiling medicines in advance of potential tariffs. Earlier, President Donald Trump said he expects to add to a raft of duties on other goods and trading partners in the not-too-distant future. Exports of medicines to the United States grew to 10.5 billion euros in February from 1.9 billion in the same month last year. Regarding the U.S. tariff policy, the UN Trade and Development Agency has urged Trump's administration to exclude the poorest and smallest economies from reciprocal tariffs. The UNCTAD emphasized that it would have minimal impact on the United States' trade policy objectives. It added that the pause offered a critical moment to consider exempting small, vulnerable economies and least developed countries from tariffs that offer little to no advantage for U.S. trade policy, while potentially causing serious economic harm abroad. It further added that increasing tariffs on goods such as Madagascar's vanilla and cocoa from Côte d'Ivoire, while generating some revenue, is likely to result in higher prices for consumers. European credit ratings agency Scope has warned that the United States may face a credit rating downgrade if a prolonged trade war undermines trust in the dollar or if President Trump enacts extreme measures like capital controls. The dollar has seen its sharpest year-to-date decline against major currencies in over 50 years, with credit default swap markets indicating the possibility of up to 5 U.S. rating downgrades. Scope rates the U.S. at AA with a negative outlook, lower than the S&P and Fitch ratings, while Moody's maintains a top-grade AAA rating. The agency emphasized that increasing doubts about the dollar's status could negatively impact your credit worthiness. French Prime Minister François Bayrou said that U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs has shattered trust around the world. He further stated that any downgrade in France's ratings could jeopardize repayment charges and weigh heavily on the country's debt.
Le président des États-Unis a déclenché un cyclone dont les conséquences ne cesseront pas de sitôt. En donnant le signal de départ d'une guerre commerciale planétaire sans avertissement du jour au lendemain, frappant d'inimaginables droits de douane, d'abord ses concurrents chinois et très vite ses plus proches alliés.
Japan's top negotiator, Ryoshi Akazawa, has announced that the country will seek the complete removal of additional tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump during his upcoming three-day visit to Washington. Akazawa hoped that the two countries can achieve a win-win situation without resorting to tariffs. He stated that the tariffs already in place are eating away Japanese firms' profits day by day, and that the government will work on the complete removal of additional U.S. tariffs. Moving on to Europe, Britain's labour market showed signs of cooling in the first quarter of 2025, with job vacancies falling below pre-pandemic levels for the first time in nearly 4 years. The Office for National Statistics reported that employer payrolls dropped by 78,000 in March, the steepest decline since the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. The downward trend was reinforced by a revision to February's data, which now shows an 8,000 job loss rather than the initially reported 21,000 job gain. According to official data, British shoppers spent more last month, even as worries about the global economy grew in the run-up to the U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff increases. The British Retail Consortium said sales at its member stores, mostly large retail chains, rose by 1.1% year-on-year in March, matching February's increase. The consortium added that the increase would have been bigger were it not for the Easter holiday falling in April this year, unlike in 2024 when it was in March, boosting sales in that month. Canada's annual inflation surprisingly slowed to 2.3% in March, 3 notches below the prior month. According to Statistics Canada, inflation rose by 0.3% on a month-on-month basis. The Consumer Price Index rose by 2.5% in March, and food prices jumped by 3.2%. The rate of increase of consumer prices in Canada showed signs of acceleration after 7 months of staying at a level of 2%. Indonesian energy minister said that the country will propose increasing its imports of crude oil and liquefied petroleum gas from the United States by around $10 billion as part of its tariff negotiations. Indonesia seeks to eliminate its trade surplus with the U.S. and avoid a threatened 32% tariff on its exports. However, when asked about the U.S. LPG import proposal, a spokesperson at the biggest LPG retailer said that the company is conducting reviews of its imports and awaiting instructions from the government. In Africa, Ghana and the International Monetary Fund have successfully reached a staff-level agreement on the 4th review of its $3 billion loan program, which is set to unlock $370 million pending approval by the fund's executive board. The agreement comes as Ghana recovers from its most severe economic crisis in decades, prompting the government to restructure its debt. The IMF noted a marked deterioration in Ghana's overall performance under the program at the end of 2024. However, the new government of President John Mahama has since implemented bold measures to address policy and reform shortfalls. Key issues included an accumulation of unpaid bills and an inflation rate that exceeded targets. In the MENA region, Egypt's Minister of Finance Ahmad Kojouk has announced that the state achieved a record-breaking primary surplus of 435 billion Egyptian pounds, representing 2.5% of the GDP. In his presentation of the draft state budget for the fiscal year 2025-2026 before the House of Representatives, Kojouk said strong financial performance was evident between July and March, with public revenues increasing by 32%, significantly outpacing the 24% growth in expenditures. Tax revenues reached an unprecedented £1.4 trillion, reflecting a 38% year-on-year rise, achieved without imposing any new taxes. According to the Saudi Central Bank, electronic payments accounted for 79% of total retail payments in Saudi Arabia in 2024, up from 70% in 2023. The increase aligns with significant growth in the kingdom's payment systems, with non-cash electronic payment transactions reaching 12.6 billion in 2024, compared to 10.8 billion the previous year. SAMA reaffirmed its commitment to continuing the development of national payment system infrastructure, expanding payment options, and promoting digital payment adoption. Global oil demand is projected to grow slower than expected this year, with the International Energy Agency revising its forecast to an increase of 730,000 barrels per day, down from 1.03 million barrels a day. This slowdown is attributed to the U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs and retaliatory measures, which have contributed to a 13% drop in oil prices this month, now around $64 a barrel. The International Energy Agency noted that half of the demand downgrade is due to economic challenges in the U.S. and China, as well as trade-oriented Asian economies. Looking ahead to 2026, demand growth is expected to further decline to 690,000 barrels per day due to the rise of electric vehicles. Oil prices inched downwards after the International Energy Agency followed OPEC in slashing its oil demand forecasts, though price falls were limited by U.S. President Donald Trump's suggestion of some new tariff exemptions. Brent crude futures were down 0.8% at $64.34 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude dipped 0.9% to $60.96 a barrel. Shell has signed a contract with Bulgaria's government, giving the oil and gas multinational major rights to explore for oil and gas in the Black Sea. Bulgaria's energy minister said that this contract is a step towards uncovering the deep Black Sea's potential for future gas supplies. Additionally, the contract will allow Shell to explore 4,000 square meters in the Block 1 to 26 Khan Trevel field. The move comes as Bulgaria, which had been totally dependent on Russian gas until 2022, has been seeking to diversify its gas supplies and find cheaper sources. The European Commission will announce a detailed strategy to phase out Russian oil and gas imports on May 6th, after previously delaying the plan. This initiative is part of the EU's commitment to eliminate reliance on Russian fossil fuels by 2027, following the conflict with Ukraine. The delays were influenced by uncertainties regarding U.S. tariffs, which could impact EU-US energy trade discussions. While Russian pipeline gas deliveries have significantly decreased, the EU's imports of Russian liquefied natural gas rose last year, with Russia still supplying 19% of the EU's total gas and LNG in 2024. And joining us now from Moscow is the professor at the Faculty of Oriental Studies, Dr. Ramil Alyoubi, to analyze the EU's delayed plan to phase out Russian gas imports and what it means for energy markets amid the growing trade tensions. Welcome to Q News Economic Bulletin, Dr. Alyoubi. Now, how significant would the consequences be if the European Union misses its May target to unveil its Russian energy phase-out strategy? Dr. Alyoubi, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, I hear you. Actually, the EU paid a tremendous price for this independence from Russian gas, and the EU had to buy liquefied natural gas from Qatar, Norway, United States, and Algeria. And actually now it's facing, like, not, I would not say economic collapse, but economic recession. So, and this means that the policy of sanctions against such big country as Russia can have some opposite effect, because sanctions, they influence the country the sanctions are imposed on, but also the countries which impose it, because they have to buy gas from alternative sources. And this has actually happened in the last few years, and the Russian, Ukrainian, European crisis proves that such a great economy as Russia cannot be deleted from the economic map of the world.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that it's feasible or realistic for the EU to totally end the Russian gas imports by 2027?
Actually, yes. So, the EU can reduce the imports from Russia, but it cannot stop them at all. And now there are some quantities of gas, of Russian gas, go to the European Union through the Turkish stream. So, and it's not easy to get rid of this dependence completely.
Mm-hmm. Then what would you say are the biggest operational challenges, infrastructure, costs, or the political unity in trying to phase out Russian gas?
I would say this is infrastructure, because actually during the years, Russia used to export its gas to the European Union via Ukraine. But starting from the beginning of this year, the contract of transit of the gas has been terminated. So, and actually now Russia has to export gas to Europe, as I already mentioned, via Turkish stream and not through Ukraine. And actually the capabilities now are limited, and much less than a couple of years ago, or even much less than in last December.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Alyoubi, how instrumental has Trump's trade policy in reshaping Europe's energy security, particularly its reliance on the U.S. liquefied natural gas?
Actually, now Europe now relies a lot on the liquefied natural gas, mainly American, but also Qatari and Norwegian and Algerian. And by the way, Egypt also can get its share in the European market in the low season in winter, when the consumption of gas in Egypt is less than in summer. But obviously, the liquefied gas is more expensive than pipeline gas, and this makes Europe less competitive in the world market.
Mm-hmm. Would European Union tariffs on Russian gas accelerate the phase out or provoke retaliation, for example, price hikes or supply cuts?
Actually, there are a few pipelines Russia can use them but later. When the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is terminated, there might be some reconstruction of Suja pipeline station, but at the moment it's actually destroyed. So, and now I don't see any perspective that the gas from the traditional pipeline via Ukraine or Nord Streams will be repaired and resumed.
Mm-hmm. Then from Russia's side, which markets is Russia prioritizing to offset the lost European Union demand? Are we looking at markets such as China, India, Turkey?
For sure, the main market for Russian energy exports now is China. China is the largest consumer of the Russian oil and also one of the largest consumers of the gas via pipeline, the Trans of Siberia. But on the other hand, China is not very willing to build the project Trans of Siberia too, because actually now China understands that it's in a position of force in front of Russia, as Russia has no such choices to supply the gas, and actually such countries as China and India and Turkey can profit from reductions on the Russian gas.
Mm-hmm. From Moscow, that was the professor of the Faculty of Oriental Studies, Dr. Ramil Ayyubi. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights. Now back to our news. Goldman Sachs has increased its end 2025 gold price forecast to $3,700 an ounce, up from a previous estimate of $3,300, citing stronger than expected demand from central banks and higher inflows into exchange-traded funds due to recession risks. In a note, the bank stated that if a recession occurs, exchange-traded fund inflows could accelerate further, potentially lifting gold prices to $3,880 per troy ounce by year's end. However, if economic growth surprises on the upside, exchange-traded fund flows might revert to previous predictions, resulting in years' prices closer to $3,550. Goldman Sachs also raised its central bank demand assumption to 80 metric tons per month, up from 70 tons previously. Gold prices gained on Tuesday, helped by the safe haven demand as U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff plans kept investors wary of trade policy, while an overall weaker dollar also lent support. Spot gold was up 0.4% at $3,223.41 an ounce. Bullion hit a record high of $3,245.42 on Monday. U.S. gold futures rose 0.4% to $3,238.7. In the global markets, the U.S. stocks rose early on Tuesday as investors considered the latest developments on President Trump's tariffs, including a potential auto sector reprieve and a concrete step towards new semiconductor and pharmaceutical duties. The future for the S&P 500 rose 0.49%, and that for the Dow Jones Industrial Average hiking 0.32%. In Europe, Germany's DAX went up 1.36%, and the CAC 40 in France jumped 0.87%. Britain's FTSE 100 surged 1.44%. And in Asia, Tokyo's benchmark Nikkei 225 rose 0.84%, the Hang Seng jumped 0.23%, and Shanghai Composite went up 0.15%. These are all the news we have for now, but here's a reminder of today's main stories. UNCTAD urges the Trump administration to exclude the poorest economies from the U.S. tariff policy. Canada's annual inflation slows to 2.3% in March. And the European Union is to announce a strategy for phasing out Russian oil and gas imports in May. This concludes our economic bulletin for now, but please don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Q News EGY to stay informed. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for watching.